Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of The One Man Snap. I am Flash, and thank you for joining me today for another episode. Back this week, as I said before, it's one guy just talking about Marvel Snap, weekly updates, things going on in the Snap universe, and everything that surrounds that. If you're listening on Spotify, I'd appreciate if you rate this how you feel. 4 stars, 5 stars. Whatever you feel like is best. If you're watching on YouTube, this is the first episode of the podcast that I'm putting here on YouTube. Just throw me a like, subscribe. I'd appreciate it. Thank you very much. Goes a long way. So this week we're going to be covering with new season. We got a new card, and we're going to be talking about some OTA updates. So that being said, I don't want to waste any time. Let's get right into it. Let's start talking about some Nebula. Okay, so Nebula is the season pass card, and this week she's coming out 1/1. Each turn your opponent doesn't play a card here, +2 power, except the turn you play the card. Those of you've I'm sure all been very made well aware of what this card is, what this card does. People have been talking about it for some time now, and from the looks of things, she is as advertised. Card is very good. I've been playing with the card since we reset here in the new season, and I can say firsthand that this is one of those cards that if you're hesitant or kind of on the fence about the season pass and it's not something that you buy every single season, sometimes you can skip it. I recommended skipping last month if you were not a heavy destroy player, right? Because we had Nimrod, and even if you are, Nimrod still was kind of quirky and doesn't really, even as I said it before at the beginning of the season, even some of the best destroy decks didn't play the card, right? Even we got towards the end of the season, Death Wave doesn't play Nimrod. The Venom destroy stuff, that doesn't play Nimrod. The only time Nimrod was being played was like in Galactus decks, and not even the good Galactic, I'm going to say good quote unquote, because I don't care for the shenanigans of the Galactus deck, but the Galactus decks that ran Nimrod in them were just worse. So that wasn't even a card. If you get to skip that month. MODOK was definitely a card that if you play discard, definitely get that. If you didn't play discard, you had no reason to get that season pass. Nebula, on the other hand, this card can go in just about any deck safely. Except probably if you're running like a heavy destroy deck. You got Killmonger and all those things. You probably don't want to put this card in that deck. But most things, otherwise, I've put her in the discard deck. She works great there. She works good in the Sarah deck. You can just throw her into your Thanos deck. You can make a Guardians deck around her. She just works in a majority of the decks that are playing right now or out there right now. I put her in the Toxic Sarah deck. She just works. She's arguably the best 1-drop in the game right now, hands down. The discussion we've had about that, whether it was Sunspot or Iceman, whatever card you wanted to put in the hat for that title, which is really just those 2 cards. And Sunspot got a little bit of a hit, with his nerf and going from a 1/1 to a 1/0, and it just lowered his play rate, which happens a lot of time when a card gets nerfed. Play rate goes down. But the card is still very good. Sunspot can still get big chunk. If you're playing those decks where you're running a She-Hulk and you want to skip turn 5 or whatever, you're doing a wave 5 tactic and you're skipping a turn, Sunspot on a turn 5 can immediately go from a 1/0 to a 1/5 just on that one turn. But again, the same can be said for Nebula, depending on what deck you put her in. If you pair it with maybe something like a Storm or something in a Lockdown, on average, Nebula is getting to 1/5 on average. At worst, she's going to get you to a 1-3, which is above rate power-wise for a 1-drop. It's already good, right? You almost have to do nothing for it to just be good. And it gets to be great and absurd quickly. It can be most times it'll be a 1-5, sometimes a 1-7. If you get this to a 1-7, you're doing something. Now, of course, if you run into a Killmonger, that's a problem. But you will know if that's a concern right away with the deck that you're going up against. You'll know if it's the kind of deck that's running Killmonger for the most part. So, Nebula is very good. I recommend buying this season pass. If you don't, if it's not, again, if it's not something you buy every month, this is definitely a month to buy the season pass. The value for the season pass is always worth it, but as I always do, is the season pass worth it for this card? Yes, 100 times over. Yes. And as I, with this podcast now, I'll be able to do something every week. So next week we'll go over whatever the next card is. I believe it'll end up being Iron Lad. Sometimes they pull an audible and switch it up, but it looks like it'll be Iron Lad and then High Evolutionary, or Iron, and then Howard the Duck, and I think Living Tribunal will be last. I don't know what they're gonna do with the order, but I'll be able to. I won't get all those cards straight up. I'm definitely getting High Evolutionary, but I can still have a conversation about it, do my research on there, and see what's out there and see what decks those cards are fitting into and what's performing well. Definitely still be able to speak on that. So go on, get your Nebula. Go and get that season pass. It's very good. The card is good. It's fun. Don't forget, we're getting Kitty Pryde this month. Whenever that update hits, it'll probably, it'll be around that third week of this month. So once we get that new patch update, we will be getting Kitty Pryde. And again, another contender for the best 1-drop in the game. So this is the month for heavy hitter 1-drops. Between those two cards, Howard the Duck, we're getting a lot of good 1-drops this month. Okay, which is a good thing because 1-drops have been on the down and outs, right? It's Sunspot and Iceman, and then a lot of just, well, here's and there's. If you play Zero, if you do stuff with Ebony Maw and Titania, then you can get some work out of some other 1-drops. But otherwise, most of the other ones are kind of a crapshoot and don't get played a lot. And if I'm forgetting one that's super important, forgive me. It's late as I'm recording this. Nevertheless, that being said, there's some other dope variants for this month, but we'll get to those when we get to those. And if that's not for you, then irrelevant. So let's go on and move right on over to the next portion of the meat and potatoes here. Much more meat. Talking about the new updates. So new week, new OTA updates. We've got some cards that have been adjusted, and for the better. Doesn't look like anything was buffed. Excuse me. Doesn't look like anything was nerfed here, which is nice, because so many times we get these adjustments, we get these updates, we get these patches for these cards, and there's more nerfs than there are buffs, and that can be kind of funky, right? It just kind of takes kind of the wind out of the sails of a lot of these cards and makes things kind of seem bleh, right? Buffs are fun. You might not, some of these cards might not even be on your radar, and they get a buff and you're like, oh yeah, sure, let me try that out. I haven't thought about playing X card. Let me give it a shot. And this week that is definitely the case with some of these cards here. So let's just go over the 3 cards that they tasked here. I will definitely read through these notes here, especially for our audio listeners. Not going everything special. You're not missing anything if you don't see this on YouTube. So do not worry, my Spotify and podcast crowd, platform crowd. Don't worry about it. So notes here from Second Dinner. As we're working on this update, the Marvel Snap metagame has a good amount of variety and players experimenting with new strategies, so we won't be rocking the boat too much. Last week featured 4 changes we're still waiting to fully evaluate, so this week we'll just include a few small buffs to cards that can use a little love. Perfect, right? Because again, things from last week are still hashing out, still figuring out, where a lot of that stuff lies. We saw a serious drop in the play rate of Sandman. I've seen so much less Sandman. It's great. I love it. So first card up, Orka. Man, people have been talking about this card definitely needing a buff for some time now because nobody was playing this. The old text was to Orka was a 6/9. Now again, none of the onboard text is changing, and there was no because they don't do that in these updates. The over-the-air updates, they can only adjust numbers. So Orka previously 6/9, ongoing +5 power. If this is the only card, this is your only card here, the new card is now going to be 6/11, the same text line. Nice update. Notes read, this isn't very complicated. Orka released low consistently one of our least played cards and weak on win rate. Definitely. He's especially vulnerable to quote unquote splash damage in a metagame where being able to counter Galactus has a higher priority for players. So the solve should clearly involve raising his floor, a design term for the card's weakest outcome, right? Just buffing his base power also keeps his ongoing symmetry with Namor's, further focusing on their fishy feud. Jesus. We don't expect to see Orka suddenly start tearing up the competitive ranks, but it's free for us to make him stronger. Yeah. Perfect, right? Because 6/11, he's now, if it's the only card in that lane, it's now a 6/16, which can win a lane by itself, especially if you plop this card in a deck where you're doing one of two things. One, if you're pretending it's a Galactus deck and you do all the other Galactus things and then just drop Orka in that lane, it can very much take your opponent off guard and not expecting a 6/16 to drop down in that lane, right? And they may have just play a Cosmo thinking you're playing Galactus, right? Something like that. Also, this will work in an ongoing now, where if you pair this with Claw in an adjacent lane, that 16 power lane now goes to a 22 power lane with that +6 power coming from Claw. So that is something to experiment with. And again, just like they say here, it's not necessarily going to be some, people are going to start doing this, but it's something to play around with, right? And that's fun. Next card, the Collector, which is unexpected. Some people may speculate that there's a $100 bundle in the shop now featuring Collector. Might this have something to do with that timing wise? Who knows? It's very coincidental, if anything else. Very convenient, but I digress. Old text, it was a 2/1 when a card enters your hand from anywhere except your deck +1 power. It's now going to a 2/2 base, which sure, I'll take it. Like most people take. I don't play a huge amount of Collector, but I mean, hey, why not? Especially with Kitty Pryde, coming back. This is definitely, Collector is definitely going to be a featured card. The developer notes here say, those of us who were playing in the beta no doubt remember the glory days of the Collector and the nerf that was merited, then brought him in line as an on-curve play in some discard and Devil Dinosaur decks. However, he's been largely squeezed out of those archetypes since, without finding a new home. Hopefully he'll be a bit more competitive with other 2-cost cards at this rate, and start earning those slots back or showing up in new decks like Bounce. Yeah, I think just bumping up that base power. Now, I don't see this card in a lot of Bounce decks, but this might be an incentive for those decks to run the Collector. And again, also, like I said, in preparation for Kitty Pride, right? You putting Kitty in a bounce deck with Collector and heck, even Falcon could be a very strong combination of things. This could also be reason for people to start going back to Collector, just kind of running Collector and some Devil Dinosaur stuff. Who knows? Just with, Coulson, and if you throw Maria Hill in there, you want to do an Agents version type thing. If you don't necessarily want to do the Moon Girl angle, which I don't care for. I know that might be hot take, but I'm not a huge fan of Moon Girl. I just don't like having to strategically work my hand size in a very particular way. She doubles it, and I just don't like the card. I don't play a lot of Moon Girl. I every time I try to, I'm like, all right, let me give it another shot. Maybe I'm missing something. Let me give it another shot. And I do, and I'm just like, it's just funky to me. It's kind of the way it handles. I just don't like. Right? I like a more strategical, straightforward type of game. Like I said, I like discard. Heck, I like move. I like destroy. I like Sarah. I just don't. The Moon Girl thing just doesn't work for me. It just doesn't work for me. I'm sorry. I'm sorry if you love Moon Girl. That you're entitled to do so, just like I'm entitled to not like the card. And the last card getting a buff this week, Luke Cage, which I love because I love that Toxic Sarah deck, and Luke Cage getting a buff is he's a 2/1 ongoing. Your cards can't have that power reduced. We know what he does. He's now going to a 2/2. I can dig it. Small buffs can go a long way. The two most popular decks with Luke are middling performers on the numbers, and the Surge in Super Scroll plus the buff to Enchantress have both indirectly weakened him. Yeah, I could see that. I mean, the Surge in Super Scroll has gone back down now that Sandman has tanked a little bit and people aren't running Patriot as much. So we actually considered testing 3 power briefly. Oof. But recalled how the Hazmat buff to 2 power months ago killed a delightful Cerebro 1 deck. This change thus restores that combo as an interesting option for Cerebro 2. That's true. Cerebro 2 now, you can do Luke Cage and Hazmat. Since Luke protects that deck from a handful of meddlesome locations as well. The added power makes Luke more viable as a quote-unquote tech card in other decks, which might come in handy if Afflict strategies reach a new high in the near future. And of course, they're talking about High Evolutionary. Okay, and what that card is going to do for that negative affliction strategy. Right? People are going to be playing those cards in that deck that does that. I forget which ones are. I know Abomination is part of that synergy, with the cards that are going to be having a negative effect on your opponent's cards. People are going to be running more Scorpion. People are going to be doing this Hazmat stuff. They're going to throw Luke Cage in their deck. I'm telling you, that combination, those cards, those no ability cards that synergize with that affliction strategy, plus High Evolutionary with Luke Cage and Hazmat, Scorpion, that's going to be a thing. And it could be strong. Not like, an A tier deck, but it could. Just theorizing it in my head, I feel like it's at least in the B tier already. In my head, I feel like it's a B tier deck. Maybe at the lower tier of A if it performs well. We will see. Their closing comments. Thanks for tuning in. We're still gathering data on these OTA updates and observing the impact on your play experience. So we appreciate all of the passion and feedback around these weekly changes. We don't have a decision yet on whether or not the cadence of these OTA balance changes will continue at a weekly pace through more of the summer. So thanks in advance for your patience on that front, and we look forward to communicating more soon. Happy snapping. I think it will continue. I think it'll continue to a point where It'll be weekly, and then once they've hit an abundance of cards that they're like, okay, we've touched this card and that card, and we've touched Dazzler and Crystal and all these other cards that nobody's playing. Let's hold back a week, and let's hold back for a little bit. Maybe we go to every other week, right? Maybe like a bi-weekly thing. You know, we'll see. Or maybe they start to and even get to a point where they're like, you know what, let's just pull it back even further and just increase to the amount of cards that we touch in the monthly, that one monthly patch update. Just make it larger, just make it a larger sample. But again, I think this makes more sense doing it this way. This weekly, you can touch more cards, you can, you know, you can buff, you can nerf, you can add a couple points of power here, take it back. Okay, Enchantress is overperforming at a 4-6, let's drop it to a 4-5. You can do that and make it a weekly thing and not have to wait. I just think it should stay that way, but I'm not the developers for the game. That's not my, you know, it's not my place to say that. I'm content. I'm very happy with those changes. I think those were all good changes. I like Luke Cage. Like I said, I like Luke Cage. I love Luke Cage's place in that Toxic Sarah deck. I like to play it. It's fun. It's entertaining. I get a lot of joy out of playing that deck. I don't play a huge amount of collector right now, but I mean, this might be definitely that might be that one point of power buff might be enough reason for me to say, yeah, let me go ahead and play some collector. And you know, prepare myself to maybe explore the bounce strategy a little more, because we're all going to be getting Kitty Pryde for free. So it's definitely worth everybody's, you know, worth in playing the game to at least try it, because that's where she's going to fit in. Sure, you could put her in anything. Yes, I'm sure you could. Tech again, she's sure she's going to slot right into like a Sarah deck, but it will be worth your wait to say, at least try it, right? If you don't love bounce and you've tried it, and maybe Kitty might be the card to say, okay, you know what, I think I like it now. It only takes that one card for you to kind of maybe change your mind on an archetype if it's that impactful. And yes, they changed Kitty, and she doesn't function the exact way she did before. Some people think it's really a huge negative change. Some people like, I don't care, it's still good. We'll see. We're not gonna know for sure until the card is out there and the card's in play, right? Orka, you know, try it, don't try it. It's not going to be a world beater all of a sudden, but could see a little bit those ongoing decks, the ongoing Spectrum type decks. Maybe take out Destroyer and try Orka in it instead. I mean, it is 16 power if you get it in by itself. Yes, I know Destroyer is 15, and Destroyer you can put in another lane, especially if you put it under a Cosmo or put it in a lane with like Colossus or something, and you know, where it doesn't hit, and then have it play where the other lane is under an armor, you know, cliche stuff, or just do something different altogether. Who knows? Come up with something. This is the point of this. This is the point of some of these changes where you can say, okay, you know what? Let me just try something. That's what makes these buffs fun. And sometimes what makes the nerfs fun too. Because sometimes a little adjustment, what we think is a nerf, it's like, oh, that actually might be a bit of a buff, like what they did with Lockjaw, right? A lot of times you actually don't want Lockjaw to proc that ability more than once. You want to play something small and have the second thing actually stay on the board. So that was a bit of again, a lot of these cards are getting side grades. They're just getting adjustments. What may seem like a nerf might really be a buff, right? It's like what they did with Galactus when they dropped the power on Galactus from whatever, I think it was 6'3" to a 6'2". It's like you kind of just buffed the card. You called it a nerf, but it really was a buff. The only situation where that was a nerf is Professor X, because Professor X is a 3 power. So that's the only instance that I can think of where Galactus, where that power drop was a nerf, right? Because if you can hit it just right, Professor X, that 3 power is going to beat out the Galactus 2 power. So that's the only scenario that I can think of. But I digress. Or not, who knows? I mean, this isn't, we're not running into, this is a podcast. For podcast sake, I'm well short of the time where one would usually spend doing a podcast. But again, this is the one man snap. This is just me. This is a guy just talking to himself here with no script. I'm not reading off of anything. Got a hat here. I don't have notes. What you will come to expect from me, and kind of how I do a lot of my content, is I don't really take notes. I mean, I take notes throughout my days, right? And I refer to things sometimes if I have something very specific I need to articulate, but I just kind of go off the top of my head here. It's, something like this where there was updates to read off of. Yeah, you have you technically have a very specific script to follow, but that's just how I do things, right? Like, I don't have a script. So it's all good. It's all on top of my head. But I very much appreciate all you guys for coming back, sticking things out with me, and hanging out, spending a little bit of time with me. I very much appreciate it, always and forever. If, again, like I said before, if you're listening on a podcast platform, you're listening on Spotify, go ahead and hit me with a 5 stars. I'd appreciate that. If you're watching or listening on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. I love you all. Catch you guys next week with another episode of the One Man Snap. I'm Flash. Peace out.